Good afternoon. I'm afraid I'm the poo in the pool because, I'm noddy no-mates in the corner with the unfashionable genes, or in this case, the unfashionable opinions, because I know you're all enraptured by universal basic income, and I'm afraid I think it's a pretty terrible idea. I'm not against giving people money. I think it's a great idea to give people money. I think if you give people money, they have a better life, and I think that's a good thing. They can make more choices. And I certainly agree with Joanna, it might be the last thing I do agree with Joanna about, that we should give, if we're going to give people money, we should give them cash, not give them services. We shouldn't be patronizing enough to tell people how they're going to spend their money. So I'm quite in favor of giving people money, but my problem with universal basic income is it's not affordable. And here's where I agree with Dean. I think this guy's right, John Kay, pretty well-known economist. Either the basic income is impossibly low, or the expenditure on it is impossibly high. The reason is that all of the ways that have been suggested for paying for it don't work. So soak the rich is usually the first resort. And I know why everybody here really likes universal basic income. I suspect you're all fairly left-wing. Nothing wrong with that, but favourite sport of left-wing people is to take money off rich people and give it to poorer people. So let's soak the rich. That's the best way to pay for UBI. The trouble is rich people are pretty good at keeping their money. As a last resort, they all move to the Cayman Islands. So soaking the rich doesn't work terribly well. The next idea is we'll sack all the bureaucrats, we'll get rid of the welfare system and replace it with UBI. The welfare system is pretty creaky. It often doesn't work in lots of disastrous ways, but it's not there out of malign intent. It's there trying to make sure that money goes to the people who need it most. And if you sack all the bureaucrats and replace it with a flat UBI, you'll then have to bring all the bureaucrats back, because otherwise the people who are really in need will go short. And then the third way to try to pay for UBI is to tax the robots. I don't think Bill Gates was at all serious when he suggested this. I think he was speaking metaphorically. And actually, here's another thing where I agree with Joanna, that if you try to tax robots, you're going to end up in all sorts of conniptions, because what's a robot and what's not? If you replace 100 people in a call center with a bunch of servers somewhere in Alaska, is that one person? Or is that 100 people? Was it 5 people? It's impossible to say. A tax on robots is a tax on innovation, and it also doesn't work. So I don't think we can afford it. And universal basic income has 3 words, and 2 of them are pretty bad. The idea of a basic income is a terrible idea. If all we do is give people just enough to get by on, we have failed miserably as a society, and it's probably not sustainable. We have to do better than just basic income. And universal, some people have said it'd be a great idea to give money to the Duke of Buccleuch. I think that's a terrible idea. I do not want to give money to the children of Rupert Murdoch or Mark Zuckerberg. If money is a scarce resource, which for the foreseeable future is going to be, we shouldn't be wasting it on people who've already got too much. So I don't think UBI is such a great idea. And this is a problem, because I think we are heading to what I call the economic singularity, which is the impact of technological unemployment. And I think this is quite possibly the most important policy challenge of this generation. Now, here's where Joanna's going to go very unhappy, and her Twitter feed is going to get extremely rude, because I'm going to talk about the singularity. A lot of people in this room know about the singularity, but for those who don't, it is the idea that at a particular time, the normal rules break down. It comes from maths and physics. In maths and physics, in a process, at a certain point, a variable becomes infinite. So the classic example is in a black hole. At the center of a black hole, the gravitational field becomes infinite, and the laws of physics stop working. And it was first applied to human affairs by John von Neumann. Quite a few people here might be slightly allergic to Ray Kurzweil, so this is actually where it comes from, so you might feel relieved to hear there's a bit of intellectual credibility for it. And he simply meant that technology was advancing so quickly that we were going to get to a point where the normal rules broke down. So that's the sense in which I'm using it. And the technology which is going to make this happen is, of course, artificial intelligence, which got going in 1956 at the Dartmouth Conference. These are the founders of the science of artificial intelligence. This is them celebrating the 50th anniversary. Sadly, they were all unable to attend the 60th anniversary of that Dartmouth conference because they had succumbed to a bug in human software known as death. And that is a subject on which David is very eloquently saying we should do a lot more about. I'm not going to talk about that today. So we know that artificial intelligence is already probably our most powerful technology, and we know that because it has thrashed smart humans at 4 competitions which we regard as being pretty tricky. Back in 1997, an IBM system called Deep Blue beat probably the world's best ever human player of chess called Garry Kasparov. He was very grumpy about that. He accused IBM of cheating, and he was probably right. And then 14 years later, in 2011, a different IBM system called Watson beat the best human players of a TV quiz show called Jeopardy. The human loser was much more gracious on that occasion. He put up a little sign saying, "I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords." And then a couple of years ago, a system beat by DeepMind, a Google-owned UK-based company, beat the world's, again, probably best ever player of the game of Go. And that was a Sputnik moment for China. And what's happened since then is amazing. China has gone from not being terribly interested in AI to being completely obsessed by it. And they are now investing incredibly in AI. And they are determined to catch up with the USA. And then last year, a machine beat some of the best human players of poker, which is quite interesting because in poker, humans cheat and they lie. And the computer had to figure out when they were doing that. Now, these last 2 events are different from the first 2 because in 2012, there was a big bang in AI. Jeff Hinton, after 27 years of trying, figured out how to make a system called backpropagation work, and that enabled people to use machine learning in AI. And that revolutionized everything because up to that point, AI had done some quite interesting things, but it didn't make money. It didn't really work in the acid test sense of it didn't make money. And now it makes a lot of money. We now have systems which do what it says on the tin. They learn, and they are creative. Now, these are narrow artificial intelligences. Unlike Tony, I don't think we're going to get superintelligence for a long, long time. I think Ray Kurzweil is completely wrong about 2029. But let's face it, nobody knows. But it seems implausible to me. For quite a long time, these machines are going to be really, really good at playing the best possible chess move in a house that's burning down around them. Super intelligent in one very narrow way and completely foolish in every other way. But we now have machines which are better at facial recognition than you are, and that's quite amazing because facial recognition is a human superpower. They are overtaking us right now in speech recognition and catching up fast with natural language processing. This is all possible because of a couple of things. Firstly, the phenomenal improvement in the power of our computers. So you all know, I'm sure, that this device has more processing power than NASA had when they sent Neil Armstrong to the moon. In fact, apparently, a high-end toaster now has more processing power than NASA had when they sent Neil Armstrong to the moon, which makes you wonder what on earth NASA was doing sending people to the moon on toasters. Brave people. Data is the other huge power behind current AI. It's usually attributed to IBM, the statement that all the data we have, 90% of the data we have was created in the last 2 years, and that will be true next year and the year after and so on. Whatever the rate is, the amount of data we generate, all the digital breadcrumbs we leave is advancing, and again at an exponential rate. And because of this, we're going to see some very interesting changes just in the next few years. First one is Siri is a bit of a joke, but Siri is going to get smart. In fact, Siri is going to get sexy, and that's a smartphone being sexy. Many of you will have seen and listened to the Google Duplex demo, which I thought was absolutely remarkable. Google has been very quiet about it since, but if they're able to replicate that in the wild, so to speak, then Google have made a huge leap from intelligent agents which can answer one question sensibly and then get completely lost, to agents which you can have a conversation with, and that's really significant. And because the other big change that's coming is self-driving cars. A lot of very smart people in Silicon Valley are saying this is years away, the technology is nowhere near. Well, Google is about to open up a free-to-all-comers taxi service with no driver, no chaperone in the car in Phoenix later this year. They've already got members of the public driving around, but you have to sign up for the program. So these things are not that far off prime time, and once they arrive, they will do a number of really wonderful things. For instance, they'll stop us killing 1.2 million people a year, which is what we do. Humans are pretty bad at driving. We're sending humans to do a machine's job right now, and we're killing 1.2 million people a year, maiming another 50 million or so. So it'll be good to stop that. We should do it as soon as we can. It'll also make the business of driving, which is sometimes fun, but a lot of the time you're just watching the number plate of the car in front of you, it'll make the process of driving a lot less tedious. Consequently, there is a tsunami of money flowing into artificial intelligence. These 6 companies have basically all declared themselves to be AI companies. Google always was. Microsoft did a very public pivot a couple of years ago. And these 6 companies between them spend more on R&D than the whole of the UK does. That's all of the UK's government, companies, and universities. In fact, I read a couple of days ago that Amazon's R&D budget is half of the whole of the UK's R&D budget. And an awful lot of it is on AI. As I said, China had a Sputnik moment when AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol, and they've got 3 very large tech giants. Baidu is their equivalent to Google, Alibaba is their Amazon, and Tencent is essentially Facebook Plus. And the Chinese government, unlike the US government, is spending very heavily on AI. And here's a list of all the great European tech giants. But it's all right, because we're going to set the ethics framework for the rest of the world. So that'll be great. Now, the thing is, we've got these very interesting, powerful systems already. Google Search, Google Translate, our facial recognition, very impressive. But we are only right at the beginning of the AI story. Some people say that Moore's law is finished, and if you want to be a pedant about the particular version of it that he stipulated, it is. It's dead. It died a while ago. But the underlying idea that machines get twice as powerful every 18 months, that has not died. The silicon industry is entirely, the chip industry is entirely convinced that they've got 10 years. And then there are other technologies coming on which will almost certainly perpetuate it for quite a while beyond. So Moore's law is continuing happily. And that's what you get with Moore's law. You get exponential growth. So that's a plot of the number of transistors on Intel chips over the years. Again, many of you in the room know all about exponential growth, but I make no apologies for banging on about this, because it is the big thing that most people in public policy areas do not understand, and they really need to get their head around it. So here's a nice little age memoir. If you take 30 normal steps, or if we walked 30 steps out of that door, we travel about 30 meters. If we could take 30 exponential steps, so that our first step was 1 meter, our second was 2, our third was 4, and our fourth was 8, and so on, it would take us to the moon. Or specifically, our 29th step would take us to the moon, and our 30th step would bring us all the way back. Now that's an important point, because every step in an exponential process is equivalent to the sum of all the previous steps. So you're always at the beginning, and you're always on this vertiginous path. There's tons of really exciting things that AI is going to give us over the next few years, and tons of interesting challenges for us to get worried about, and these things get lumped in as a group called AI ethics, which fortunately Britain is going to set the rules of the road for. But I think there are 2 really big changes coming which aren't being paid enough attention to. I'm not going to talk about the technological singularity, which I wrote a book called Surviving AI about. I think it's a fair way off, and there are people working on it, which is great. There need to be, because it's very important. But we're not taking the economic singularity seriously enough, and it's more urgent because it's coming sooner. So I'm just going to talk about that. And as you can see, I've written a couple of books, one on each. And now I've written one book which covers them both. And just before I get into the economic singularity, I have completely failed to persuade David of this, but I think it's quite important. We are not entering the 4th industrial revolution. Klaus Schwab is a brilliant man. He founded Davos. He's done many great things, but he's done the world a disservice by establishing this meme of the 4th industrial revolution. What is happening now with AI and other technologies is much more important than the 4th subset of the industrial revolution. In fact, it's really the 4th revolution to affect humanity. The first was the cognitive revolution, where we figured out how to communicate, which enabled us to bring down mammoths and collectively escape tigers. And then we had the agricultural revolution, which enabled us to create food surpluses. Not a great deal for the individual human, pretty bad deal for a lot of animal life, but a really good deal for human civilization, because it enabled us to create cities, and cities are machines for innovation. Then we had the industrial revolution, when suddenly a curve of world GDP went from doing that, really nothing for millennia, to doing that. We gained mastery over a lot of the earth, in some not such good ways, but we completely transformed the business of being human. Now we are now in the information revolution. The industrial revolution hasn't stopped, it'll carry on for a while, but we're in the information revolution, which will have much, much more impact than any of the other ones. So boo to Klaus Schwab. So the economic singularity essentially is automation, which is not new. We've had automation since before the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But the poster child is the agricultural industry, where in America, I know we have some Americans in the house today, in America in 1800, 80% of every American who worked on a farm. And in 1900 that number was down to 40%, and now it's down to about 1%. Now, for the humans, that involved a lot of difficult disruption, and people died. But in the long run, humans carried on doing jobs because we had other skills to offer. The past rounds of automation were mechanization. They took away our muscle jobs. But we had our cognitive abilities to offer. So the descendants of those people working on the farms in America in 1900 and 1800 are now in this room, well, in this room's equivalent in America, and in shops and offices. It didn't work out so well for the horse. The horse had tremendous muscle power, but when that was mechanized away, it didn't have much else to offer. So peak horse was in 1915, when in America there were 21.5 million horses, almost all of them working on farms, and now there are pretty much no horses working on farms in America, and the horse population in America is 2 million. That is pretty serious technological unemployment. The horses were a bit surprised by this. They didn't see it coming. But it was pretty serious for them. Now we have a different type of automation coming. It's cognitive automation. It's not just coming after our muscle jobs, it's coming after our thinking jobs. And they don't look like this. They are banks of computers somewhere very cold or with great air conditioning. So in 2013, Frey and Osborne wrote their seminal report, which said that in about 20 years, about half of all American jobs will be automated. They didn't say whether there would be new jobs to replace them, and they've been busy rowing back on this recently. They've realized that they've become a bit unpopular in polite society, so they're trying to backtrack on it. And we have had cognitive automation in the past. It's not completely new. So in all these states marked blue in this map, the most common job description was secretary. And when I started work, there were secretaries in every office, and now they're all gone. They've been automated by Microsoft Office. In the green states, the overwhelming number of states in this map, green, the most common job description is truck driver. So what happens to truck drivers when these guys arrive? And as I say, it's not that far off. Now, in the commercial sector, in the commercial vehicle sector, as soon as you can introduce a self-driving vehicle, you will. Because if you don't, your competitor who does, is going to put you out of business. So it seems to me that in the 10 years or so, just a rough guess, after self-driving technology becomes ready for prime time, which isn't that far off, most of the 5 million professional drivers in the US are going to be redundant, and the 1 million professional drivers in the UK. Now, in those 5 million, among those 5 million professional drivers in the US, quite a lot of them have got guns. And road rage against the machine is not going to be funny. So what will those truck drivers do? Previously, they may have gone to work in factories or warehouses or in call centers. Well, automation is going to be hitting those areas too. But it isn't just the boring, rote, and or manual jobs that will get automated. There are already machines which can do surgery better than the best human surgeons. They're slower, they're expensive, but that will change. And lawyers. Now, this is probably the first time in history that lawyers have been at the forefront of technology. But lawyers are finding quite a lot of their industry is being automated by AI. The thing is, as soon as a machine can do your job, it will, because it'll do it cheaper, better, and faster than you. And if that isn't true this year, it will be true in 18 months, by which time it's twice as powerful. And obviously, twice as powerful doesn't translate directly into twice as smart, but there's a reasonable tangential progress. So it doesn't really matter, some people think, in the long run, whether you're a barrister or a barista. And it doesn't matter whether you're white collar or blue collar, because the machines will take the job of the white collar person just as much as they'll take the job of the person who makes that white collar. Now, I, broadly speaking, think this is true. I, broadly speaking, think we have to bite the bullet and accept that many people, I think it's most people, are not going to be employed. They're not going to be in jobs. That doesn't mean to say they won't do work. Work is an entirely different thing from jobs. But I think we have to accept an awful lot of people are going to be unemployable. Not everybody, because there will be people who we need to be making strategic decisions about companies, about countries, and there'll be some jobs which are just too expensive to automate for whatever reason. It might be that plumbers are the last people standing because it's too fiddly to automate them. Who knows? And we don't know the timing of this. We really don't. There's consultants making quite a lot of money now by forecasting year by year which part of the UK will be first to suffer this bit of automation. And I don't blame them for doing it, but it's hokum. We just do not know the timing. My personal guess, but it's just a guess, is that nothing much is going to happen for 5 to 10 years. Then we'll start seeing it, but in about 30 years' time, I do think that about half the population will be unemployable, and it may well be a lot more. Now, a lot of people, and I think Joanna's among them, think that this is rubbish. This is the Luddite fallacy. We've seen it all before. We've had automation in the past, and it didn't cause lasting, widespread unemployment, and the Luddites were wrong. And what they say is that we will work in tandem with the machines. Particularly the leaders of the tech companies are very keen on this. We'll work in tandem with the machines, which is fine, and I'm sure that's true for quite a long time to come. And it may well be the case that we'll throw up more work because of this AI revolution in the short term, rather than less. But eventually, because the machines keep getting twice as good every 18 months, our role in the partnership is going to get eroded. So here's some really simple maths. Assuming Moore's law or something like it continues, in 10 years' time, the machines we have will be 128 times smarter than they are today. 128 times more powerful, probably something like 128 times smarter. In 20 years' time, 8,000 times more powerful, smarter. And in 30 years' time, 1,000,000 times smarter, more powerful. Really? Are we really going to hold our position in that partnership throughout that time? I highly doubt it. So then people say, well, look, that maybe machines will take almost all our current jobs, but they are not conscious, agreed. They're not empathetic, they don't have empathy, agreed. Therefore, they can't do caring jobs, not agreed. What's delivered by humans in most caring jobs is a pretense of empathy, and to be frank, often not a very good one. Machines are also pretty good at pretending to be empathetic, and they don't pretend or actually be cruel. They just don't do that. There's no point. And it turns out, in Japan, which is at the bow wave of the greying of society, turns out that people quite like being looked after by robots. Possibly because, as you get a bit older, you tend to tell the same joke over and over again, and if you tell the robot the same joke 1,000,000 times in a day, it just doesn't care. So then the last line of defense of the reverse Luddite fallacists is to say, well, we'll open a magic job drawer, and all these new jobs will fly out. And I can't tell you what they are yet, because we haven't created the technologies that will enable them. Now, that may happen. I can't say for sure it won't. I don't have a crystal ball. It just seems to me rather implausible. So I think it is the reverse Luddite fallacy. And I think it's not only dangerous because it's misleading policymakers, I think it's also profoundly pessimistic. The idea that we have to all stay in jobs forever is boring. Gallup did a poll a couple of years ago that found that 92% of humans do not really engage in their jobs. They don't really enjoy their jobs. 8% of people do. So why do we have to keep that other 92% doing boring jobs like being an Amazon delivery driver or a junior auditor? Apologies if there are any junior auditors in the room, or even any Amazon delivery drivers. Freeing people up from the tyranny of jobs would be a good thing. So let's do it. A lot of people think that we'll struggle to find meaning. I suspect there's not too many people who think that in this room, because you've already liberated yourself from that idea by thinking about UBI. So the next thing that people worry about, quite right, is money. How do we keep everybody alive and having a good life if we're not doing jobs? And as I say, I don't think UBI is the answer, because I think without a major change, it's not affordable. So I've played around with various other ideas like human elective leisure payments. So it's a payment you get if you volunteer to give up your job to somebody else who really likes working. So you get a payment for that. But I think this is fairly rubbish too. I think the real answer, and this is going to seem completely nuts, the real answer is abundance. The real answer is the Star Trek economy. in which we make all the goods and services that you need for a very, very good standard of life nearly free. Not completely free, because quite possibly uniquely in this room, although I suspect Dean might be with me on this side of the barricade, I believe in the market. I think the market is a fantastic mechanism for resource allocation. If you take it away with communism or any other system that's tried to remove the market, you get disaster. So I think we shouldn't make things absolutely free, but close to free. And although it seems a bit of a nuts idea, if you think about it a little, it becomes feasible. So when I grew up, it was impossible, even for a very rich person, to have access to all the music that they might ever want to listen to. And now it's £10 a month. It's amazing. My son in the audience at 16 has never known anything different. He thinks it's just the natural order of things. It is not. It's amazing and revolutionary. So a lot of the things that we buy and that we crave are digital. It's clear how those things could get very cheap. What about the physical stuff? So take transportation. If you take the human driver out of the equation, if you turn every vehicle electric, so you haven't got little explosions going on all over the place and you've got a lot fewer moving parts, and critically, if you make the energy nearly free, and solar cells are on an exponentially declining cost curve, and in some period, I don't know when, whether it's going to be 20 years, 15 or 25, and also our storage and transmission technologies are getting much better, electricity will be close to free. So there's no human driving it, it's got a lot fewer moving parts, its energy source is nearly free, transportation gets very, very cheap. And you can replicate that across the economy. So I think the Star Trek economy is possible, and in fact, I think we're just heading there anyway. I think this is pretty much a natural development. It's not easy to see, but on this chart, these are lines of stuff. This is Americans buying stuff. They're not slowing down. Americans are still buying stuff at a great rate. But it's costing less. The resource that are going into the stuff they're buying is going down. So I think we're heading anyway to an economy of abundance. But I think this is the insight that people who are enraptured by UBI miss. We can't afford UBI, but maybe we can if we make the goods and services nearly free. But there's another wrinkle, and this is a really important one, and almost nobody gets this, and it scares me. This other wrinkle is panic. In 10 years' time, 15 years' time, I don't know, it might even be 20, pretty much everybody is going to see robots driving themselves around the world, and they're going to know that their friend Vera, Bert and Fred, who used to be lorry drivers and taxi drivers, have all been put out of a job by it. And whether they're a plumber or an actuary, they're going to think, those robots are damn smart, and it's not going to be before long it's going to come from my job. And if we don't have a plan to reassure people that we're heading to a good place, there's going to be a panic. And panic can be very dangerous. Panic can give us this stuff. Panic gives us populism. And as I say, there are some Americans in the audience. I don't want them to think it's just them. You know, panic gives us populists of the worst sort. And here's another really bad sort of populism. You know, the thing about populists is that they tell you there was this previous time when everything was better, life was less unequal, it was fairer. And I know the solution. I'm going to take us all back there. And also, anybody who disagrees with me is not just wrong, they're morally evil. Those characteristics are true of populists on both left and right, and we've got far too much of it. And this guy in particular, he's probably going to be single-handedly responsible for Brexit, because he's what's stopping the Labour Party doing what it should do, and point out the rather obvious fact that Brexit is complete lunacy. So populism exists all over the place, and we need to not have a much more virulent version of it that we would get if everybody thought that they were all going to lose their jobs and everybody else was as well. So what we need is a plan. We need a plan that says, we've looked at this in great detail, and we know that the economy of abundance is not only possible, it's actually inevitable. It's where we're going. There's going to be a period of serious disruption and serious turbulence. Hang on with us. We'll invent some sort of a progressive leisure payment or a progressive basic income, and it'll get us through that period, and when we get to abundance, it'll all be fine. Now, how do we get that plan? There's one of the world's leading AI researchers, Stuart Russell, who is very worried about all this, says what we should do is get a group of science fiction writers and economists and psychologists and other people, lock them in a room and not let them out until they've come up with the answer. And I think broadly speaking, he's right. We should do that all around the world, lots of these think tanks, to figure out, is the abundance economy possible? Is it where we're going? And how do we get there without blowing ourselves up in the meantime? Now, I might be entirely wrong. Joanna might be right. It may be that robots can never be nurses, and that there'll always be lots of jobs. That might be true. But if I'm wrong, and we invest some money in these think tanks, we might lose a few million quid. Frankly, who cares? If I'm right, and it isn't just me, if this is true, and we don't do this preparatory work, then we will have that panic. And we will have that panic in... that's not a phone call, that's my bot telling me that it's the panic. We will have that panic and it will be devastating. We must avoid it. So the reverse Luddite fallacy, I think, is dangerous and pessimistic. And you people, although I disagree with you about most things, you are actually at the cutting edge of people who are thinking about this. So I need you to stop thinking what you think, agree with me, and talk to your friends about the changes that we need to make, and let's get prepared for the economic singularity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joanna, would you like to comment?
Uh-oh.
So I think you've done a really bad job of trying to piss me off, because I agree with everything you said. Almost, there's a few details that are different. But by and large, I totally agree. I don't think there's anything that we can't do with AI that people can do. And that's why I can't remember which slides I was able to give in this talk. That's why I think it's really essential that we understand that humans are the core of society, and that's what we develop things for. So that's one of the big points of disagreement. I don't think humans are in the same situation as horses, because we are the motive force behind all the technology that we build. And so, however, I won't say that there's a certainty. I'm not one of these people that totally believes that it can't be that we have a whole ton of people that are just unemployed and disfranchised, as we had illustrated this morning is happening in the UK, and as the New York Times wrote about, incidentally. So, but this year, not that I'm a big fan of the New York Times either. I'm from the Midwest. Anyway, but I think this is the real threat. One of the things I really worry about is people not valuing humans and deciding that we shouldn't have a whole lot of people have jobs, and then they just throw another world war like World War I or something, or they find some other way to just kill off all the people they don't see a use for. So I think that's like the dystopia, and that this is the utopia, where you're trying to figure out how to make sure you distribute the goods. And I do think that we'll keep jobs, as I said before. So that's the two minor things. I don't think we'll be horses. As long as there's redistribution, then I think we'll find ways to employ each other, whether it's to paint our houses in some unbelievably elaborate way or whatever. But I don't think that that's necessarily true, and that's why I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Any comment on that, Calum?
I think that was a response rather than a question, so...
So clarification. Clarification that there's more points of agreement, and that although we're not quite sure what the solution is, this is absolutely deserves brainstorming, which is why I've had people from multiple perspectives here, people who in a sense have gone beyond the pale in one angle or another, but hopefully to bring new light.
It seems to me, as someone absolutely new, this is the first engagement I've had with this whole conversation.
Welcome.
So it seems to me that one group says either we have to give everybody enough money to be able to afford the essentials, or we need to make the essentials so cheap that people can afford them. So actually they just seem to be flip sides of the same coin, although how we get there is a massive question. So I want to now extend that to, that's okay for us in the West. How does this apply globally, so that we can get to a point where we haven't got these hideous refugee streams of people desperate for a better life, and we can somehow facilitate people having dignified lives at home?
Yeah. So technology can spread around the world really fast. These things were invented 10 years ago, and if you go now to a train station in Nairobi, you won't find anybody not looking at one. It moves quickly. And if we do get, if cheap energy and incredibly efficient production processes, thanks to AI, do create the economy of abundance, that will also spread around the real world really quickly. And it's much, much easier to make it easier for people to live by making things cheap than it is by taxing Mark Zuckerberg, who's only got a certain amount of money. He's got a lot, but he's only got a certain amount, to give it to everybody all around the world. Just an adjustment to what you said, it's not about paying people for the essentials or making the essentials cheap enough for everybody. It's about paying people to have a really good life, not just essentials. That's one of my key points. You know, universal basic income is a horrible idea. I don't want everybody to have a basic income. I want everybody to have a universal generous lifestyle all around the world.
Last question back here.
Thanks for that, Calum. It strikes me that listening to what you said and listening to what other people have said has just kind of reinforced my notion that actually what we're facing is something that's incredibly complex and incredibly uncertain. So what is it that you see that we need to do within that context, given the ideas that have been shared today?
Study the hell out of the question of whether the economy of abundance is possible and indeed inevitable. And if it is, if it looks like it is, because that work isn't being done, if it is, then devise a very convincing plan that will reassure everybody who starts to panic when they see the self-driving cars wandering around, that that's where we're going and it's going to be okay. You know, if we get through this economic singularity, that world before superintelligence is amazing. A world in which humans do not have to do jobs is a world in which we could have a renaissance of creativity. People would do whatever it is they want to do. Excuse me again for insulting the Americans, but Americans tend to think, you know, if you don't have a job, then you have no meaning in your life. It's the opposite of the truth. Meaning isn't delivered by being an Amazon delivery driver. It's delivered by the quality of your relationships with other people. It's delivered by the creative stuff you do for fun.
Yeah, it's not American. It's the Calvinist work ethic or the Protestant spirit.
It's partly that, but I'm just teasing some American friends who happen to be here.
All right, so we'll come back to a few more questions in a minute, but let's give Calum thanks for leading us through that discussion.